Hey guys, welcome to another video lecture. This one's going to be a little bit different, not just because my hair is growing like vines on the side of an old building. I don't know what to do with it. I'm at a loss. No, this one's going to be different because we are going to go back in time and we're going to go across the country. The question that we're going to focus on is, what were the results of early 19th century industrialization in America? What does that mean? Well, the early 19th century is the early 1800s, which we've moved into in our course. And industrialization is the beginning of machines and technology and inventions that changed the way we live. So we're going to look at that. But the reason I say that we're going to travel in time is because instead of re-recording a video lecture, I thought I'd show you a video of me teaching this exact lesson 6 years ago back in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is where I'm from. So what you're going to see is myself 6 years ago. I guess I was 28 at the time. My hair is a lot shorter, a little chubbier here. I don't think I had a beard. I don't know. I don't remember. But you're going to see me 6 years ago in my old classroom in Hoboken, New Jersey, teaching you about the Industrial Revolution. What I'm going to teach you about in this video is all of the different inventions, movements, changes, innovations, technology that the United States starts to produce in the early 19th century. Now, our question is, what were the results of that? Unlike our other essential questions where I ask you to really think about what that question means to you, this one's a little different. It's in 14 to 20 sentences to essentially list all of the different results. What I want you to do is, when you talk about a result, whether it's an invention or an innovation or something, don't just say this thing was invented. Like, tell me what it did. Tell me what its purpose was. So all you need to do is essentially list all of these results, whether it's a movement, an invention, an innovation, and then explain like why that matters, like why is that significant. So I'll give you a good example. One of the things that will be produced during this time is called the locomotive, which would go on to create automobiles or cars, but initially was used to create a train, a railroad. Don't just tell me they invented trains. Like, okay, so what did that do? What was, yeah, they invented it, so what did that do? And don't just say it went from there to there. It changes things, and I'll explain it in the video. Ultimately, I want you to see the changes that happen because of this industrialization, and I want you to write about that. So what are the results of early 19th century industrialization in America? What are the changes that are brought about because of this industrial revolution? Okay? Now I'm going to provide the slides that you'll see in the video. I'm going to provide that to you. There are some more slides than the ones that I put in the video. That's just extra. That's if you're curious, you want to learn about it, but I don't go over all of it in the video really just to save time. There's just so many innovations. So just understand that what I'm going through in the video, you'll have a copy of attached to this. So without further ado, feel free to laugh at me. Here's me 6 years ago explaining this exact question to my old students, but now to you.
Okay guys, welcome to a video lecture on the market revolution. I'm Mr. Gregory. Let's get started. Okay, so today's focus question is, what were the results of early 19th century industrialization in America? We're going to go through this lecture, talk about some of the things that happened in the Industrial Revolution, and I want you to tell me, what's the effect of that? What are the results of all of this industrialization that we have in the 19th century? So let's start with roads. The very first turnpike is in 1790 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Okay? By 1832, it was 2,400 miles of road that connected major cities in the area. Nowadays, we have highways, we have a highway system, we have roads that connect the entire nation. But the Lancaster Turnpike of 1790 was the first major road to connect major cities. Then, in 1811, we have the Cumberland Road, also known as the National Road. And this road went from St. Louis, Missouri, all the way to Baltimore, Maryland. Okay? And as you can see on this map, there's the Lancaster Turnpike in green, and in red is the Cumberland Road. Okay? All right, so now that we have these roads, how are we traveling on them? Well, one of the ways we travel was through the Conestoga or covered wagon. Now, the thing about a wagon is you had your whole life in there. Okay? Whatever it was that you were trading, all your money, sometimes family members, your whole life is on that wagon. But the roads, it's not like they're paved. Okay? These roads were rocky. It was very frequent to see an axle break or have a wheel break, and then you were absolutely screwed in the middle of nowhere. So wagons were helpful in getting across these roads, but they were very costly and not very effective if you broke down. However, this is the Conestoga Trail of the 1820s. This is what many western Pennsylvania farmers were using to bring their goods to the East Coast. Now, since wagons were very ineffective, water routes were much more effective. Rivers, though, were already pre-established. You had to go wherever the river went. A canal is different. A canal is man-made, and you can direct the canal to go wherever you want. In the 1820s, the United States created the Erie Canal. It started in 1817 and it was completed in 1825. And what it does is it connects Lake Erie, which is essentially Buffalo, New York, okay, all the way through New York State and down through the Hudson River. Now, you could ship something from Cleveland, Ohio, Buffalo, New York, and instead of spending more money on a Conestoga wagon that would take longer, you could send it through the Erie Canal and it would show up in New York City. Here's a report by the Secretary of the Treasury in 1853. He's basically saying that the growth of business in this country is directly because of the canal. The canal allowed our economy to grow because it was now more efficient to ship things. On these water routes, whether it be a river or a canal, you still had to have a vessel to get down these water routes. The steamboat, which was invented by Robert Fulton in 1807. Here's the thing about the steamboat. It relies on a different energy source rather than just the flow of the river. It relies on steam. Now, because it's relying on steam, it does not just have to go with the flow of the canal, so to speak. It can go upstream, which was a completely revolutionary way to trade and move goods. So there were a lot of boating accidents in which steamboats were blowing up in the middle of rivers. It isn't until about the 1830s that the steamboat is a much more stable way of trading and migrating. Let's look at the costs in terms of trade in America in the 19th century. Take a look at this chart. As you can see, on the axis on the left, you have the cents per ton / mile, okay? And on the bottom axis, you have the years, going from 1785 to 1865. Now take a look at this. Wagon rates slowly decrease in price from 1785 to about 1845. There's not much of a change. But look at upstream river rates, canal rates, downstream rates, and railroad rates. They all significantly drop. As there were more steamboats, more railroads, more canals, more efficient ways of moving and trading, you were able to lower the cost. And this really helped out the American economy. Shipping costs, okay? You know, when you buy something online, there's shipping and handling. It's now cheaper than it's ever been, especially if you want to get it very soon. But this all started in the 19th century with railroads, with canals, with rivers. So what's the point of this chart? It proves to you that going by wagon was not really efficient, wasn't very cost effective, but that the popularity of canals and railroads was allowing the cost of trading to go down. 1830, the Iron Horse wins. Many people, we call them Luddites, they were afraid of new technology. They thought there's no way a man-made machine could be more effective or faster than horsepower. or an actual horse. So the iron horse was pit in a race against an actual horse. And the iron horse, the steam engine, actually pulled a tram with the same weight at a faster rate than an actual horse did. And this is called the Iron Horse Race of 1830. Because the iron horse was able to prove to many people that it was more efficient than an actual horse, a steam engine was more effective than a wagon, much more rail track is built during this time. In 1830, there was only 13 miles on the Baltimore Railroad. By 1850, there was 9,000 miles of railroad track. By 1860, 31,000 miles of railroad track. You can see in this map how railroads are starting to develop over the nation, okay? The black represents railroads up until 1850, and there's a little bit on the map, but the red, which dominates the map, is railroads built between 1850 and 1860. Once railroads were proven to be effective, they caught on like wildfire, and railroads were the way to get around the nation in a much faster rate. It also lowered shipping and trading costs. Now, in the North, immigrants built the railroads. In the South, slaves built the railroad. Here's another thing about this market revolution or industrial revolution. Americans were willing to try anything. They were copiers first, and then they became innovators. From 1800, there were only 41 patents in the entire nation that were approved. A patent is when you get the rights to an invention. So if you invented something, you got a patent or you got a payment for people using that invention. In 1860, by 1860, there were 4,357 patents in the United States. American resourcefulness in the 19th century just explodes. People are inventing things. They're coming up with new ideas. This shows American ingenuity in the 19th century. We had Eli Whitney's famous cotton gin, which was able to separate cotton seeds from the actual cotton cloth. Now, it was actually invented by a slave, but Eli Whitney copies this and makes it into a more efficient machine. Now, even though Eli Whitney ripped off a slave for the cotton gin, he did come up with some other good ideas. In particular, interchangeable parts. Now, interchangeable parts are very important. If you owned a gun, let's say, and it broke, before interchangeable parts, you had to send the gun back to a gunsmith or the gun manufacturer, and you were without a gun for however long that took. With interchangeable parts, you didn't have to send the gun back to the manufacturer. You just had to get the part that was broken and get it replaced, and that took way less time. Samuel Morse creates the telegraph in 1840. Now, you might have heard of Morse code. That's the language that people use to communicate on the telegraph. The beeps and the boops, a long beep and a short beep, they all have different letters that mean things. And people would have to listen into the beeps, and they would write that down as a recorded message. This makes communication way more instantaneous. Today we're spoiled and we have phones and we can hear each other. In the 19th century, they had the telegraph, which is how you could communicate over long distance. Now, we always hear about the American dream. And the American dream is sort of the idea that Americans can come from nothing, but if they work hard, there's opportunity and wealth to be had. There was a German visitor to America in the 1840s. His name was Frederick Least. And he sort of noted about the American dream. He's basically saying the idea that Americans were moving forward. They were progressive. They wanted a challenge. They wanted to solve problems. But one of the problems with this industrialization was the distribution of wealth. You had some people that were really rich and some people that were really poor. During the American Revolution, 45% of all wealth was in the top 10% of the population. In 1845, Boston, the top 4% of people owned over 65% of the wealth. Oh my gosh, that's a large majority of the wealth owned by such a few amount of people. By 1860 in Philadelphia, the top 1% controlled 50% of the wealth. So 1% of people have 50% of all the money in Philadelphia in 1860. Doesn't seem fair. What is the point of all this? With this industrialization that was happening during the market revolution, the gap between the rich and the poor was widening. Samuel Slater is the father of our factory system. Samuel Slater spent some time in England, and he watched the factory system there. Now, it was actually a crime to release the details of the British factory system to other countries. But Samuel Slater comes back to America, and he brings the factory system with him. He's never punished for this, although he wasn't welcome in Britain afterwards. Now, let's talk about the Lowell Mill, which was a textile plant in Massachusetts. Francis Cabot Lowell wanted to have his workers live closer to where they were working. So he set up what are called working towns, okay? And Francis Cabot Lowell set up a town in 1814 where he invited young women to work in his textile plant. Women worked in the Lowell Mill and then didn't have to travel far to go to their dormitories, essentially. It was almost like college. And they were in a very safe environment. A lot of these women were single and were just working for a few years to save up money to give to their husbands for when they eventually married. These women worked 10-hour days, 6 days a week, and they spent their days working, eating, praying, and sleeping. What were they making in the Lowell Mill? They were making textiles, which was using cotton to create cloth and curtains and things like that. Now, since the gap between the rich and the poor was widening, you had the rise of unions. You might know what a union is. Some of your parents might be a part of a union. A union is basically a group of workers that decide they want to even the scales between the owners and the workers. So the first real union that we see is the Working Man's Party of 1829. It was founded by Robert Dale Owen and others in New York City. A union that was very local, it was very social, it was a group of workers, but it was also very weak. They didn't have a lot of power. It wasn't until 1842 there was a landmark court decision, Commonwealth versus Hunt, in which the Supreme Court ruled that unions are legal organizations and had the right to organize a strike. Now, you might have seen a strike before. It's when workers refuse to work until they're paid better, until working conditions improve, until they feel they're treated equally. This is a landmark decision because it gave power to workers. We have unions until this day. Some people think they're too powerful today. But regardless, they are essential to American industrialism and the American economy because they even the scales for workers to be paid the right amount, to have decent working conditions. So, let's look at our focus question for today. What were the results of early 19th century industrialization in America? Guys, I hope you really enjoyed this video lecture. Have a good day. Woo!